Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Notsosrs, a podcast for students by students. I'm your host, Aditya. I'm a digital marketing consultant and a law and business student at the University of Warwick.
And I'm Leo, a 19-year-old computer science student from Funway University.
Right, welcome back to our podcast. Today, we have something very unique. We have two guests, actually, and we have Rehhahn, we have Madin. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves because this is a very hastily put interview, and I will get to why in a bit. So, Rehhahn, you want to start off?
Sure. So thanks, Leo and Aadi, for having me on. My name is Rehhahn Tadbol, and I'm currently employed as a business development consultant at the Diversity and Inclusion Youth Movement. And I'm also serving as the outgoing youth president for the United Nations Association Malaysia Youth. So my focus is on empowering the youth for both of my occupations. However, with DIYC, I take a more events-based approach, and with UNAM Youth, it's more catch-all and SDG related. So that's a bit of in a nutshell about me.
Really cool stuff. Madin, what about you?
Yeah, my name is Madin, and currently I'm the head of data for a US startup called Neighborly, which is essentially a startup trying to really bring a third space revolution. But generally, I also freelance and consult mainly on business intelligence, data architecture, data consultancy. So yeah, that's generally what I do. But then a lot of different domains, a lot of different interests, a lot of overlap with United Nations as well. So yeah, we can definitely talk about that.
Fantastic. Right. So as I mentioned, this is a very hastily put up call, and that's because our actual guest today actually kind of bailed on us. So thank you so much, Rehhahn and Madin, for coming on in such short notice. I really hope that we can make this worthwhile. So Leo, why don't you tell us what we're talking about today?
All right, so the hypothetical question of the day is, we don't have a drum roll, but the hypothetical question of today is, what if we stopped reading? Aadi, would you like to elaborate?
Sure, I guess I'll go first. I think that obviously, I think reading is really important. I think all of us here on the call, we are quite active readers, and we do try to digest information as much as we can. I personally would just want to talk a little bit about what would happen if we stopped reading today. So I think that in the short run, I think for a good 6 months, I wouldn't see a major difference in my life. I think in my day-to-day activities, a lot of the stuff that I do doesn't really require information of the things that I read. But I think when you hit the 6 month mark, or when you go to a new environment, I think I'm going to find myself not being able to talk about anything that's current. I'm going to find myself rehashing information from the same source material. And so I'm just going to sound like a broken record player. And I think at the end of the day, I'm actually going to be suffering from incredible writer's block and be in a creative slump, because a lot of my work in digital marketing and in content creation involves coming up with very unique ideas as well as consulting. And I think if I didn't have these various sources of information kind of combined in my head, I don't think I would be able to do that at the level that I can at the minute. So I guess it's me. Rehhahn, do you want to answer that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I think my situation is a bit different because as a consultant for business development and someone who's still caught up very much by the trials and tribulations of anything to do with international relations and global politics, our competency very much depends on current affairs and being able to stay up to date with current news, trends when it comes to the youth, as well as doing background research for certain areas of discussion that you'd like to bring forward in your events. So again, right off the cuff, you're going to see a big hindrance in my ability to stay relevant and stay informed when it comes to I'm able to engage these topics, either as a host, a co-host, co-organizer, or even a moderator for a topic session. Furthermore, I think personality-wise, as I mentioned to Leo and Aadi earlier before this call as well, my opinions are incredibly fluid. I'm not a very opinionated person, and I'm an individual who depends greatly on exposure to other perspectives. So I was saying as well that if you ask me one question today and one question 2 years from now, I highly doubt that the answer would be different. And I see that as a good thing because your knowledge expands and your information pool expands. Therefore, your opinion should mold as well. So I would feel very constricted by not being able to read, I feel.
It's cool. It's really, really, I think important thing that you touched on is relevance. I think it's so important that we, I think humans are very communal people, and I think that any activity that involves being around other people kind of forces you to have to stay relevant, or at least be aware of what's going on at the minute. So I think that's incredibly important to touch on. Madin, what about you?
Well, I mean, there's really nothing for me to say that has not already been said in terms of the general importance of reading, right? But I think the angle that I'm going to take is a little bit different. I think if we stop reading, we may not necessarily stop learning. It may not necessarily be mutually exclusive. Although I'm a huge fan of reading physical books, and I think that's probably where the premise of the whole hypothetical question is as well. But I do think that we live in an era where there's just so much stuff happening that demands our attention. And as much as I would love to go back to the old days where I would sit in bed the whole day, read a book, I simply wouldn't be able to have that luxury with my current work life. And so in a way, I guess stopping reading may shift it to using other forms to consume the knowledge. I think one of the coolest things that we've discussed, Leo and Aadi, were Uptime, which is an app that really summarizes books. So if the question is, what will happen if we stop reading physical books as it is, but then move towards the summarized, bite-sized form of information, I think that'll be an interesting perspective to look at. But I do think that reading is still important. Just that maybe we might be in the process of evolving the way we consume knowledge.
Very cool. Leo, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me it's similar points to everybody else. I think also perspectives that you wouldn't otherwise see, like Madin said, you wouldn't stop learning because you'll still learn from your surroundings and from your own interactions. But especially now with how much content we have available to read and how many perspectives we can look at, or we can get an insight into, it will be quite a big detriment to not read.
That's really interesting. I want to touch on something that Madin said, and I want to get everyone's opinions on it. Is Madin brought up Uptime. We are not sponsored by Uptime, although I would love it if Uptime gave me a free subscription for promoting their service. But Uptime, it's an app. Essentially what it allows you to have 5-minute hacks for books, courses, and other forms of media. And so it works on a very, very cool user experience, because you click a book, for example, let's say it's 4 Hour Week by Timothy Ferriss, and it shows you all the 3 takeaways with call to actions on how you can implement the key takeaways from the book. It's a really, really quick, easy way to digest information. I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder with regards to this, because I see that when we progress towards the world of TikTok, Instagram stories, and so on and so forth, what I tend to see is that I think their attention span. I think we are forever chasing this quick sense of pleasure. We are losing our ability to hold on and take delayed gratification. And I think what's a consequence of this with regards to reading and personal development is that you tend to lose the nuances. The thing is, right, honestly, when you write a book deal, like when you get a book deal, your book deal is normally based on like pages, and you have to write a lot. Honestly, most books could be written as a series of blog posts, but there's a lot of context, there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of ifs, buts, maybes, and anyhows that go into writing a book. And I think without that, you can still get the takeaway, but you may not be able to understand how that may apply to your life from just that one key takeaway. And when you look at big societal issues, things like, for example, racism, systemic racism, or for example, Rehhahn, I think you can comment on this, issues of the youth. Can young people vote? Do they have the political literacy to vote? When you answer questions like this, if you don't understand, I think the nuances that go into it and take into context the history or the culture of that particular question, I think you start to have debates that are very surface level and start to antagonize groups of people. And that's why you see on Twitter, where you have just these 2 groups. There's just, you suck, I hate you, and you are a coward, go block yourself, and things like that. So I think that kind of stems from that shorter attention span. What do you guys think?
Okay, so I agree with that, because if we weren't able to broaden our understandings of different thematic issues that we want to discuss for whatever purpose, whether it's youth empowerment or something else, right? It's incredibly boring and very, very harmful intellectually speaking to kind of promote an echo chamber when you're discussing important things that, for example, lead to a decision-making process. So if we're talking about a public policy that's going to impact the youth population in Malaysia, for example, if I'm not able to read, how am I going to gather perspectives that are outside of the norm that could potentially be more suited to the situation that we currently face, right? And to eliminate that risk of proliferating an echo chamber in parliament or whatever, you really need to do your own reading, and you really need to avoid a unilateral, singular approach when you try to deduce the contributing factors to different problems that exist. Because I think something that's unfortunate with how modern policymakers view different topical issues is that they expect that when I talk about issue X, it's directly correlated to cause A, or at best cause A, B, and C. But something that I've learned very interestingly from constructivist theory is that you really need to understand the context behind what proliferates that issue to exist in the first place. What are the historical and social undertones that influence that issue to exist in the first place? Because if you understand that nuance, and you understand that nuance by reading and doing a research, for example, you are then able to create a solution that is better tailored to the problem that exists. So agreed. In short, your ability to understand a particular issue reinforces your ability to create a solution that is apt, I feel.
Fantastic. Leo, Madin, would you like to offer comments?
No, I mean, I think it's very hard to see, another perspective on this, given that, like, the reason I brought up uptime was not to say that uptime is going to replace reading. And I think the purpose of apps similar to this, right? Not to mention just uptime. I guess the initial goal was to provide that opportunity for people who do not have the time or the focus to get some information. But I think there's a danger in doing that as well, because ideally you would want that to be the entry point, like the top of a funnel, and then ideally you want them to read the book, right? But I think a lot of time what happens is people have this assumption that they've already gotten everything out of the book. And I think a lot of times at these apps, what they do is they create that kind of that, okay, this is everything there is to the book. But what Rehhahn said, similar to the constructivist perspective, right? Like a lot of the reason, the context behind it is far more important than the content, right? Or the substance. So what these alternative to book platforms, what they're doing is they're just giving you the content without the context as much. Sometimes when I read a book, what interests me more is more than the message. It's the messenger himself. Like, what was the story that he went through? Why did he come up with this? I mean, that could be a personal preference, right? But I do see, even in a domain as as obscure as data, right, which is primarily numbers, not very context oriented, there's a lot of context that you can benefit from. A lot of the books that are available for data really helps you understand why certain ways that people interpret data. Like, I mean, you've seen the way Malaysia has handled, for example, the metrics that were used to determine success, right? And a lot of these things are very obvious for someone who would spend the time reading that, but not so much for someone who just consumes it from the surface level approaches that you mentioned. So I do think like the hidden benefits of reading is it's not reading the substance, it's in the context, like you and Aadi have mentioned, Rehhahn. Yeah,
I think that's
my opinion.
That it's less about the substance, it's all about like context as well as the messenger. I think a similar message can be given in multiple different ways and by different people. I think it would resonate very differently. So I think that's something really important to take away. Leo, do you want to offer some thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, on that point of the context, being important. I guess you can apply it to a lot of different things. I'm gonna make a very hot take. That's my own personal hot take. But I think with things like religion or any ideology, without
got here.
without the context behind it, the content is a bit slack. Because I mean, if you are, my reasoning for that is that okay, because for hundreds of thousands of years, humans tell or distribute information as stories. Like that's our most like primitive way of sharing information, right? And although it's far more efficient to just say like bullet point things, bullet points without the explanation and without the story behind it, sort of reiterating on that context point, you can miss a lot of the reasons why you do it. And when you miss why you do something, or if generations down the line forget why things happen, then I believe that's when you get the history repeats itself.
Yeah, I think Leo, you spot on with that thing because I think humans are very driven by stories, and I think what books do very well is it gives you an emotional attachment to a lot of things, which really set the stage for you to remember what it is that you have learned. So I want to talk a little bit about something else on tangent, is gatekeeping reading, or at least as a form of learning. I've had people who tell me, if you're not reading, and I mean reading books, then you're not learning. Or people who gatekeep things like audiobooks. And so I want to ask everyone here, what is your favorite form of learning something new that is not just in the form of a book? And how do you think that's kind of helped you learn something?
For me, if I might speak, my favorite way of learning things is actually through talking to people. The only reason why I find reading convenient is because I can be a bit picky about the people I choose to talk to. So when I don't have a very good pool to select who I can talk to at a given hour, then I go to reading. But the reason why talking to people is so interesting is because it's a lot harder to be so refined as you would find some writers to be when you're interacting with someone. You can really see the spirit behind what they say, and you can really see, or not always see, but you can kind of deduce how their socioeconomic standing or their personal upbringing influences the opinions that they hold. So for instance, another hot topic to add on to Leo's one is this whole notion of inequality in gender when it comes to working in particular areas of profession, right? And the narrative at the moment is that there's a glass ceiling for women to be employed in certain areas. And in certain areas, that is true, of course. But in others, it's dangerous to assume that there's a unilateral reasoning behind any problem. So it's not just an issue of gender bias, for instance. I would dare people these days to go out and actually have conversations with people working in different areas of profession and try to understand why is it that you don't see as many women employed in higher positions in certain professions. So, for the army, for example, naturally more men are going to enroll in the army for whatever reason. And the important goal that we should be striving towards, in my opinion, and through my reading, this is what I've come to, is that equality of opportunity is incredibly important. That's the goal that we should be striving towards, not gender parity, for example, in every single workplace. So that's already contrary to the entire UN narrative, and I apologize to my UN compatriots who stand by that. But that is what my reading and my exposure to conversations have led me to believe. And I wouldn't have had this nuanced understanding of that topic, for example, if I wasn't able to read as well as converse with others.
I think that's brilliant. Leo, what about you? What's your favorite alternate method to learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think conversation is probably up there, which is why, I'm happy to start podcasting and to just talk for other people here. Yeah, conversations are probably number one for very, very similar reasons to Rehhahn. I guess another way that I will elaborate more on, maybe in a different episode or through an article, is using Google Alerts as to find articles as opposed to any other app. Just looking at Google Alerts on its face value, for me, I found it very useful to just get a broad understanding or broad set of perspectives, even if I don't look deep into the nuances of them. Not like the TLDR of Google Alerts is that it will pull like a dozen or so articles out from Google based on a keyword that you search. So it's akin to searching a keyword every day, but it gets emailed, like the top searches get emailed to you. So I'm not going to comment on whether that may or may not be biased, but to me, alternate to conversation or to actually going to read books, I think it would be that in terms of learning and seeing as much of the world as I can.
That's really cool. Madin, what about you?
No, definitely agree with the whole conversation aspect. I think Rehhahn really elaborated quite well. And I think in a lot of the domains that you want to learn in, conversation is it's irreplaceable. Like without having conversations with your people, whether it's stakeholders, people who are affected, just anyone who has had remotely an experience would really give you intimate understanding and access to the knowledge that you wouldn't get from any book, at least to that level. But I also think that, not just a learning method that's tangible, but something that I've really started to believe over the years is that true learning sometimes happens through reflection, boredom. And I'm a very firm believer of boredom being healthy. And by boredom, I mean just reducing the stimuli that you are, exposed to, at least for short periods of time, so that you really get to produce output instead of inputting into your brain as much as possible. And I think that's really how most of the learning, like the true knowledge creation, happens. And it's definitely something that I feel like the way we are moving towards the future is making us less and less accessible to. You have stories of people like Carl Jung just going into the forest and staying there for like months, just producing his seminal work, right? We just don't have those kind of these really revolutionary experiences happening anymore. But then even people like people that we really look up to, like Albert Einstein, most of his moments really came through that boredom focused reflection. So I think reflection is really underrated way of learning, because what true deep reflection allows you to do is to combine all these different sources, all the bits of pieces of conversations you've had, the books you've read, to really kind of mesh them together. And I think it touches roughly upon horizontal thinking or fluid intelligence, which is something that modern society really doesn't respect. At least it's becoming more and more accepted. But like the whole education system is geared around vertical intelligence, vertical thinking. So you become an engineer, you're vertically very engrossed in it, right? But there's no real emphasis on knowing how to take analogous concepts and then bring it into different domains and then use that to solve problems, right? So I think reflection and generally just pondering over certain things that you've learned or just questions that you've had about the world is a very strong way of learning.
Yes, I think so too. I think my thing is going to be a bit controversial, but I think videos and movies. I think growing up, I was always told, "Why are you watching so much TV or YouTube or whatever? Why not just go read a book?" But I honestly think that a lot of my biggest discoveries, a lot of the things that helped me so much in work, have come from the things that I've learned, picked up in movies, YouTube videos, so on and so forth. And that's mainly because of understanding or analyzing the context behind what they do and kind of looking beyond just surface level screenwriting. I think the key thing here from listening to everyone, I think for people to take away is learning can come from everywhere, not just from books. Although books are incredibly valuable, try to find the lessons in anything, even in just yourself. And I think that you will go a very, very far way. But we don't have a lot of time. And so I'm just going to wrap this up really, really quickly. Thank you so much, Madin and Rehhahn, for talking to us again. I'm going to link Rehhahn and Madin's LinkedIn and in the show notes so that you can reach out to them if you would like to. I really hope Madin and Rehhahn, you kind of reply back, I guess. But to those of you listening, please subscribe to our blog at notsosrs.com. That is notsosrs.com. Leave us a like, review, and follow our Instagram page at notsosrs on Instagram, notsosrs. Thank you so much, everyone.